Hello, I'm Danny Cook,
I do apologise, Danny.
and welcome to the 5th episode of Halftime Cuppa's Halftime Podcast, a 15-minute show where we discuss just one footballing topic in as much detail as possible. So joining me on today's panel, we have Jake Thomas, a first-time panellist, and a returning panellist is Charlie Pumfrey. Thank you very much for joining us again.
Good afternoon. Not to date this at all.
Thank you. Now on to today's format, which I'm sure will be a right laugh anyway. The panelists will be debating one topic, and each panelist will have to either argue in favour or against this topic. It's now time for me to toss the coin, but before I do, today's topic is on whether Alan Pardew is the right man to keep West Brom up this season. Now, the Baggies, at the time of recording, find themselves just 2 points above the relegation zone. And for those who are interested, Alan Pardew apparently still has around 2 years left on his 8-year Newcastle contract.
That is terrible. That's such a bad fact.
Anyway, I'm going to toss a coin. Jake, you call it.
Call what? The coin?
Yeah.
What else are you going to call?
Heads.
Heads it is. What would you like?
I would like to argue against.
You would like to argue against the former Crystal Palace manager.
Jake, we're not friends anymore. Oh.
So that leaves Charlie.
I've done it. I've done this before.
You've done this before? Okay, fair enough. Charlie's arguing in favour of Alan Pardew keeping the Baggies up. Before we went on air, we discussed as to what ones they would have preferred. And Jake has played an absolute blinder here. He's stitched Charlie up. So this is going to be really interesting to find out. Let's start with Jake there. You chose him sending them down, so arguing against.
I didn't realise that's what we were voting for. I thought, okay, this is my argument. I don't think you should have got it at all. I don't quite understand why they got rid of Tony Pulis, truthfully.
What do you think they did, though?
It's a bit hit and miss. I don't quite know what they thought they were going to get with Alan Pardew that they weren't getting with Tony Pulis. I mean, he's never been relegated, so surely you would have thought the reasonable choice would be to keep him there, considering where they are. I don't see why Alan Pardew would make a better choice than Tony Pulis in that sense. It could have been a case of backing Tony Pulis again in January. I don't know. I don't quite understand it. They're not building on anything, I don't think.
Is there any reason at all that you think as to why they've made this change?
Alan Pardew looks like a badger, doesn't he? I don't... Oh.
Badger?
Yeah, he just reminds me of a badger. I'm not convinced. I don't really see what they're hoping to get out of this. So I don't understand what Alan Pardew is going to be able to do that Tony Pulis couldn't. I don't understand.
So when I said probably just over a minute ago, Jake's played an absolute blinder. He's actually played a massive blunder here. I think you've chosen the wrong one. Charlie, is there anything you want to add on to that? Bearing in mind, Jake's
am I arguing that am I going to argue that he's going to work for West Brom or not? Because Pardew brings a bounce, doesn't he? Whenever he goes to a club, when he first gets there, they win the first few games, or they have a really solid start. I think I don't have the stats on that one, but if you look, he's at Newcastle. He took them to 5th. So I mean, that's a real show of a club that was actually just pretty much fresh out of the Championship after they unrightly sacked Chris Hughton. And if you look, he has had really solid spells, and he's got all the foundations at West Brom of a club that can get out of its situation and be comfortably mid-table.
Do you think he's got the resources there at the moment?
I think so. I mean, if you look, they've got he's got a fresh Chinese owner who I'm sure is more than happy to plough a few $100 million into that club. Probably not, to be honest. It's Alan Pardew. Don't trust him. But he's bringing that bounce, and I think he's been brought in more as a stopgap to get them through this season. And then if he has a bad start next year, it's a pretty easy one just to remove him.
Do you think that he would be backed by this owner? Could be backed?
Well, I don't think Tony Pulis was. Truthfully, I mean, who did they bring in the summer? They got that Polish midfielder who's quite good.
Go on, say his name. Go for it.
Grzegorz Kirchwiek. Anyway, so yeah, he's decent. Fair enough. Other than that, who do they actually bring in who is capable of progressing them? Like, truthfully.
Oliver Burke from Leipzig, Jay Rodriguez, Kieran Gibbs.
No, not really.
Would you not say they're all players that can come in and be exciting?
No, I don't think they are. I mean, Jay Rodriguez was dead for about 3 years, wasn't he?
I mean, doesn't mean he's dead now. He has scored goals this year.
Yeah, but he didn't do a great deal. He's what, 20?
A few months into the season.
He's 28, right? Probably one of the better ones they brought in. I mean, who was their Egyptian centre-back they brought in?
Hegazi. He's been a really good pickup.
Has he?
I think so. My fantasy football team at the beginning of the season seemed to think so.
I'm not convinced.
Pick up then, Jake. Why aren't you convinced?
Was it just a bit underwhelming? There's something about them that just doesn't seem to sit rightly. Like, I mean, Gibbs wasn't great at Arsenal. Why would he be brilliant at West Brom?
Because West Brom aren't Arsenal.
They're very meh players. They're just meh. But
this is something I'm going to pick up on, if you don't mind me coming back quickly.
Absolutely.
West Brom probably knew they had to move on from Tony Pulis at some point in the next, either at the end of the season or now.
Yeah.
So now what they've decided to do, they've decided to go, okay, we're going to step away from what Tony Pulis was doing. And if you hear the players weren't interested in playing for him anymore, he sounds like a coach does very similar sessions all the time. And I can imagine as a player that gets quite depressing after a while.
That's fair enough.
And so they've decided they've gone into the market now and they've picked up probably the best of a bad bunch of managers. Let's not be rude.
Why not do that in the summer though? Why?
Because they can't risk going down. This season in the Premier League is so much more competitive.
But they've already gotten to the point where there's a good chance they're going to go down. Like, why?
I don't think there's a good chance they're going to go down. I think it's very tight at the bottom of the table right now. I agree with you on that.
It is tight.
But if you look, this season,
it seems a little bit strange. Like, why would you go into it thinking, right, okay, we're probably going to get rid of Tony Pulis, but let's give him a few months to sort of balls it up, and then we'll swap it. Why not just do it from the off? If you know you're not going to stick with him, if you know you're not going to progress, because let's be honest,
it's worth taking. It's worth taking the risk.
Isn't a progressive.
Surely it's worth taking the risk on him.
Take a risk on who? Tony Pulis.
On Pulis at the beginning of the season. He's a known quantity, surely. It's better to go with him then. As much as the Watford move for Marco Silva has worked, if they'd have gone for someone like that, there's definitely risk that it wouldn't have.
I don't think it's progressive. Not really. I think it would have been progressive to have got someone in the summer and given them
Pulis isn't progressive.
No, exactly. That's what I mean.
So they should have got rid of him and brought another manager in.
At the start of the season, if they wanted to carry on. But I think given where they are now, I don't see why they've swapped it now. I think they've got the timing the wrong way around.
Do you think that the players will be able to adapt to a Alan Pardew sort of style of football rather than a Tony Pulis style?
I don't actually think there's massive dissimilarities between the two, in all honesty. I think Pardew plays a slightly more aggressive style of football than Pulis does, which isn't really saying much. But if you look as well, he's very good at motivating his teams. You never really hear of whole groups of players falling out with Pardew. It's usually a case that if he leaves a club, it's more of a board decision than the players wanting him to go. I think, if anything, he'll get them together.
I'm not very good at debates. I kind of like to listen and change opinion as things are said, but I don't personally understand why. If you knew you're gonna get rid of him at this point in the season, obviously depending on results, why not do it in the summer?
I think they backed him in the summer purely for the reason that it made sense to back Tony Pulis in the summer. And if you look at the deals they've done, there aren't really many big risks in there.
It's very safe, isn't it? It's a very safe.
So you say they backed him, and they did back him to an extent. But if you look at players like Oliver Burke, who probably needs more game time now, and I imagine he'll get that under Pardew. Or you look at Kieran Gibbs, $7 million from Arsenal. He's probably got resale value.
Christ, was he $7 million?
Yeah, Jay Rodriguez, $12 million from Southampton. These are all players that actually potentially could move on for similar values and not really be as much of a risk. And so for me, I think it's been played. If they played the summer very well.
They played it safe, but it hasn't worked.
And so it makes sense now that they can bring someone like Alan Pardew in now, and they can get a bit of momentum under him, get to January, and maybe pick up one or two more.
I just personally think they probably should have done that in the first place, though, if they knew they were gonna. Because I mean, to sack him now, surely in their mind they would have had doubts pretty much from the off. It
is difficult because obviously you have the issue. If they'd have sacked him in the summer, there weren't that many top managers, good managers, and progressive managers available that would go to a West Brom. Really, I know that
depends on your luck.
Well, it's difficult because, like I say, the problem is if you take a risk on someone like a Marco Silva, it either works well or you end up with Frank de Boer. So it's a double-edged sword, really, isn't it? If you go out in the summer and you back someone like a Frank de Boer and he brings in players to play a certain style and that certain style fails, you end up with a squad that doesn't really work in the Premier League and actually a few players that are disgruntled. And I think Roy Hodgson's just only now starting to get away from that. And so I think having someone like Alan Pardew coming now,
I don't think it's a great squad anyway.
I think it's quite a malleable squad. I think he can mould it into what he likes.
You got players like Chris Brunt, who's been there forever and a day. Macaulay. I mean, it's just.
I think there's several players in that squad that are very much.
To be honest, it reminds the squad itself reminds me a little bit of Fulham when we went down. There's players who sort of rely too much on the fact they've been there for quite a while. They're probably declining a bit based on the name and how long they've been there and the legacy with the club. It's assumed it's going to be fine, when in reality, they're probably past it a bit.
I think there's an element of that, but you look in that squad, I think there's quite a few players in there. You've brought in Alan Pardew now. You've committed to him until the end of the 2019-2020 season, and so he's got players in there that I think are actually right up his sort of alley for players. You've got players like Solomon Rondon, Matt Phillips, Nasir Chadley, James McLean.
There are a couple of ones that
very direct players.
Let's be honest. If anyone's going to sort of do the work,
the best out of them,
probably be. But I mean, no disrespect, like Gareth Barry's very meh.
He's a reliable player. He's the sort of player that
he's reliable enough, but is he really what you want going forward to take the club forward?
Not necessarily. No, I agree with you there. But then you've got players like him. But then other players like Sam Field, who scored last night against Newcastle. Young, I think he's under 20, and he's a sort of player that will come in and sort of can take over from someone like Gareth Barry.
Yeah,
I think they have that. They have two generations of players in that squad. I agree with you.
I think it's they seem to be in a bit of a transition period, I think, and they've got to play it. They've got to be careful. They do remind me a lot of when Fulham went down. We had a couple of players that we thought, you know what, if we can get it across properly, we'd probably be in a good position next year. I imagine it would be a similar story with West Brom. They can stay up and sort of survive the next year or two. 3 years down the line, they're going to be the
upper mid-table. Yeah,
I think so personally, but it's.
That's why for me, I think the Pardew deal makes sense for them. As much as I dislike the man, he makes sense. I get what you're saying
about best of a bad bunch. It's a case of.
I mean, you look at the other potentials at the moment. I'm actually just looking for a quick list of managers that are potentially available. I mean, the best really of that bunch, you've got players like Sam Allardyce has now gone to Everton, so that takes him out of the equation.
Yeah.
Are you going to go for someone like a Slaven Bilic or even a Walter Mazzari who left Watford in the summer? Are you going to take the risk on someone like that? I don't think that makes sense, in all honesty.
Well, I mean, the real question is, I suppose, is whether Alan Pardew in the long term will therefore be a good appointment for the club to take them to that next stage. I mean, where Charlie, do you realistically think this West Brom squad should be if they were to restart the season now? Where should they have sort of placed themselves?
Well, you see, that's a very difficult question, because I think at the beginning of the season, what people expected of clubs has actually become very different to what we've actually got now. I think if you look at the bottom three, it's Palace, Swansea, and I believe Everton is still in there. I might be wrong with that one. Might be West Ham, not Everton. And I think actually a lot more is in flux this year. The three promoted teams have come up, and not to blow our own trumpet, but we've really overperformed against what was probably expected. And I think actually it's made the situation more difficult for a team like West Brom, because they have had a very safe summer. They haven't taken many risks.
No, exactly.
But actually, I think that is all their decision making seems very tight knit. They seem like they like to make very safe decisions that have low downside and high upside.
They don't want to push the boat out as such. They don't want
to. I think they're waiting. They seem like the sort of club that are waiting for the right sort of manager to come along and bring his own philosophy to the club. And I think the new owners have only really just recently got really ingrained with the club. And I think you saw the fact that the owner came over and then Pulis was sacked. Kind of shows you that they are becoming a bit more hands-on with the club. And the fact that he has actually probably been sacked a little bit earlier than sort of other managers in the league, I think it makes sense to go for someone like an Alan Pardew, to be honest.
Final question then. I mentioned at the top of the show about the 8-year contract at Newcastle. Now, do you still think he will be at West Brom? And I'll go to Jake first. Do you think he'll still be at West Brom come the end of his 8-year Newcastle contract that was offered to him ages ago?
No, not at all. I don't think so.
How long do you think it'll last?
This time next year, maybe. Truthfully, like at a push.
Okay. Let's bring in.
You said he had 2 years left, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably at a push this time next year.
Okay, let's bring in Charlie. Charlie, what's your thoughts?
I get a interesting feeling about Pardew at West Brom. I think the two make sense together. He's more expressive for that club. And if you look at sort of managers they've had recently, going back to sort of even beyond Pulis, you have managers like Pepe Mel and like that have really been below par. Jake's laugh sort of tells the story for me. And having someone like Pardew come in, there's a squad that really is actually, I'd say, quite similar to the one he had at Palace when he first got there. I think he's got something, he could build something there. But the Premier League nowadays doesn't manager last 18 months.
Something like that, something ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's a short life.
Exactly. I think you lose 5 on the spin and you're next on the chopping block, aren't you? So
I'd tell you who I think would be the right manager to take a club like West Brom forward. Montea, who was at Milan.
That's interesting.
That would, if I were the owners, I'd be saying, right, Pardew, get Pardew to steady the ship, keep him up, etc. That's what I would be aiming for in the summer then to build off of.
But going off, I think Pardew makes sense. Like I said, so that's my arguing as well.
Yeah.
But actually, if you look at sort of managers that are available, if you're going to be really ambitious, you do want someone in that mould to come in and sort of take you forward and push on. And I actually think maybe someone like Aitor Karanka, who was at Middlesbrough last season, did a very good job with that squad. I know he was backed quite well there. But having someone like that's a little bit younger can kind of encourage a very different philosophy. I think that is something that they need.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well, that's just about it. We're out of time on today's podcast. Thank you very much. I love you too, Jake.
I love Danny.
Thank you very much for a fantastic debate. Don't forget, you could decide who the winner is by casting your vote in the polls below, and let us know if you think Alan Pardew is the right man to keep the Baggies up this season. And as I say, thank you very much, gents, for coming on. Today's panelists were Jake, Thomas, and Charlie Pumfrey. Thank you both.
Danke.
I don't think that was a debater, so I think that was just me progressively agreeing with Charlie.
That's fine.
Like I did quite well there. You stitched me up.
Entertaining. That's fine.
That's what I was aiming for, entertainment.
Good man. I've been your host, Danny Cook, and you've been listening to the 5th episode of the Halftime Podcast.
Meow.